back, everyone. Passover and Easter are going to be very different this year. Many people are being forced to change their traditions because of the pandemic. Some are trying to get together virtually while staying physically distant. But it also means people are having to cope with loneliness and worry, perhaps loss of a job, even maybe the loss of a loved one. Joining me tonight to talk about this is Reverend Michael Koren and Rabbi Dan Moskowitz. Reverend Koren is a deacon and commentator, and he is in Toronto. And in Vancouver, Rabbi Dan Moskowitz is a senior rabbi at Vancouver's Temple Shalom. Welcome to you both.
Hello.
Thank you.
Rabbi Moskowitz, let me start with you. And first, let me say happy Passover to you.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you.
For a lot of people, this is going to be a very different one.
Well, you know, the Seder begins with the sentence, "Why is this night different from all other nights?" And last night was the first Passover Seder, and it sure felt different. We had family in California and across the United States all zooming into our service and our Seder, and it was similar, but it was still too distant.
Yeah.
It's a challenge.
Yeah. And Michael Koren, it's not quite Easter yet, but happy Easter in advance.
You.
How is this impacting your congregation?
Well, I'm just a deacon. I'm a mere junior. But I mean, in general, what is going on with congregations is, of course, it's profoundly different. It's totally different. They have to be virtual. Churches generally, a few fringe examples that are disturbing, but overwhelmingly churches acted swiftly and responsibly. And they went to electronic media quickly, which wasn't always easy for them because churches haven't always been at the forefront of that sort of change. So they've set up services electronically. They're reaching out to people on an individual basis. I just, a few minutes before I went to air, got a phone call from a message from a priest friend saying, "Am I okay?" And that's what a lot of us are doing. We're simply messaging and phoning people to see if how they're doing. Because one important thing, it can't be denied that within Christian circles, often congregations are older. People are older. They're not always savvy and comfortable with computer technology, have to use the telephone. There can be no physical contact. But at a time when family is meant to be all important, community is meant to be all important, Easter, Passover, that's the very last thing that can occur. But it's ironic, but in that physical isolation, we have to emphasize spiritual community and do that in any way possible.
Yeah. Dan, what is the biggest challenge, do you think, for people?
Well, I think part of it is that it's unfamiliar. Religion is about ritual and tradition, and we are sort of programmed for this, many of us from when we're very young, and then all of a sudden it's completely thrown up in the air as something new, and we have to adapt. I think the religion can be sometimes slow to adapt as we try to hold on to traditions, but what makes us and allows us to continue to be relevant is that ability to improvise and to overcome the challenges. And so we're doing that. We use Zoom. We send out a PDF version of the Passover prayer book or the Haggadah. We create new rituals that have a place for the iPad on your Seder table, have a way to share readings even when the volume or the audio is asynchronous, those kinds of things.
Yeah. Do you think people are having a hard time with the loneliness aspect, not seeing their children or grandchildren, as it were?
Well, very
without
hard.
a doubt. Go ahead, Reverend. Sorry.
Oh, thank you. I am. I mean, my wife and I are at home with the dog, and we're doing okay. I mean, it's strange.
But you have a wife and a dog.
Exactly, yes. The order there was all important, by the way. We have 4 children, and we see them by Skype. The other day, one of them, she came with her partner to see us, stood about 10 feet away. I mean, it's all very bizarre and surreal, but that's what we have to do. But loneliness is the great curse of modern society anyway. Particularly, it might be surprising to people, but in urban centers. Often in wealthy areas. Wealth is not the issue. Material comfort's not the issue. People are very lonely and isolated. But that's multiplied myriad times by what is going on right now. So people who are already lonely feel it colossally, and that's terribly dangerous.
What is loneliness at its core, Rabbi?
I think at its core, the human being is a social being, and we yearn not only to be, in communication with others, but proximate to each other. With the touch, that embrace. I've been doing funerals over these last few weeks that we've been in isolation, and we limit them to just 10 people standing around the graveside, 6 feet apart, everyone. And what you want to do at a funeral is you want to hold each other, you want to hug and embrace, and that's the thing you can't do. And so at its core, I think it is the human yearning for connection and our inability to fulfill that. Here it's precluded because of the virus, but we, as the Reverend said, loneliness was a problem long before this. Technology was a core or a source of that problem for many, as we focusing on our screens and our pixels instead of the people in front of us.
Reverend?
But that's an excellent point, because actually technology was part of the problem, and now it's become part of the solution. Now, God willing, when we come through all this, I don't know how we'll handle that, because a number of people, particularly if this goes on long enough, will become very comfortable and used to this sort of technology. But I've always thought that the internet and social media, they're not bad in themselves. They can be abused, they can be exploited for negative purposes. Now we're using them properly. We're using them as they should be. Look, candid, numbers are up in some cases. I lead morning prayer and Bible study a couple of times a week, and we've had better numbers than in the past, partly because you can sit there in your pajamas and just turn the computer on. But also, I think people do feel that need. I mean, responsible religion would never, ever try to exploit this situation. But people do feel need. I'm contacted on Twitter by people who have no religious belief, but they see the collar on me and they simply want to chat, to speak. So I call them, we have a conversation. So there are no positive aspects to this. It's all so awful, it's so bloody, but within it, we can try and rescue something which is light and bright and look into a better future.
Rabbi Moskovitz, what do you tell people who are feeling lonely, perhaps sad, because they've lost somebody?
Well, one, I think, is we need to acknowledge it, that that sense of loss is real, and we don't want to minimize it. We don't get over grief. We have to go through it. And so we have to feel it in all of its ways. Part of that is to celebrate and honor the loss of a loved one. And it's difficult, again, to do if there weren't lots of people at the funeral or at the reception. In Judaism, we would say a shiva, a memorial back at the home, where they can't feel, again, that embrace and that comfort of community. So I encourage them to reach out, and for others, more importantly, to reach out to them with phone calls, with letters. I encourage people to do journaling. I think it's important to be in a reflective space. And we're in British Columbia, where miraculously it's not raining today. It's beautiful. And I encourage people to get out into nature. Some of us find God most outside of the walls of our home. And fortunately, as long as we're not around other people, we can go out into nature and to experience the beauty there and maybe the tranquility and be sustained by that.
I would imagine, Reverend Corn, that a lot of people will learn to be alone, right? Truly learn to be alone and learn to respect that space during this pandemic.
That's a very good point. I think that is true, and pretty much all religions do respect the idea of solitude. Now, that's not forced loneliness and isolation, that's something different. But being alone, which implies for a person of faith, you're alone with God, which leads on to prayer. And I say that in the morning and evening office of the Anglican Church, I pray. It's part of what I do. But for people watching, whatever you believe, whatever you don't believe, that's not the point. Just to sit down and reflect, because most of you do have far more time than you're used to. Sit down and reflect about you and the people around you and what is happening to the world. Call it prayer if you like, call it whatever you like. I really don't care. But I think there's an opportunity here to focus on things that we haven't in the past. I'm not saying learn an instrument or learn a language. I'm way too old for all of that.
Learn yourself.
Yes, that's it really. Yes, just sit in quiet. Perhaps there's no option, and think. And my God, if it does lead you to God, I'm all for it. But just give it a try.
What do you pray for in times like this? Rabbi, let me start with you.
Well, I pray for miracles, but not the miracles of God and burning bushes that we're celebrating now at Passover. I pray for the miracle of the human capacity to find solutions to problems. I pray for the miracle of medicine. I pray for patience. I pray for insight, that our healthcare workers will find the solution and the cure and the treatments and the therapies to this problem. I pray for human ingenuity, really.
Reverend Corn?
Yes, I think that's very well put. There have been some rather jarring examples of some people on the fringes of the church praying with absolute certainty for a cure, a vaccine, or whatever. But most responsible people in the faith world pray for the frontline workers, pray for those who are trying to find a vaccine, pray for those who face danger, unemployment, fear, isolation. All of those things, and of course, pray that this will be over. But faith is not simplistic. It's not linear. It's not the idea that if we pray hard enough, it'll all be okay. I mean, my golly, today we within the Christian world, we remembered Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who 75 years ago today was executed by the Nazis, a martyr against the evils of Nazism. God doesn't guarantee a perfect life. I think God guarantees a perfect eternity. But we pray for the good things and the right things. And they're not always the selfish things either. But just, as I say, time and reflection alone, thinking, asking questions. I would say this, faith, at least for me, is as much about asking questions as receiving answers. And that sometimes is quite challenging for people to embrace.
All right, we'll leave it on that note. Reverend Michael Korn and Rabbi Dan Moskowitz, thank you both so much for taking time out to talk to me tonight.
Pleasure.
Thank you.